facing head-on the emotions beneath the surface as we bridge from an old world of confusion and lack to a beautiful new world of freedom, abundance, and love with straightforward truth and inspired hope is what you'll find on The Charla Anderson Show. Collector and connector of fascinating people. And everyone is fascinating. Here's your host, Charla Anderson.
Good, beautiful day, you beautiful, beautiful souls. This is Charla Anderson, host of The Charla Anderson Show, collector and connector of fascinating people, and everyone is fascinating, especially you. We're here on the winwinwomen.com and .tv platform. We're going to be on Roku, all the streaming services, podcasting coming along really soon with Poditize, and so excited to have you with us. We're always, always, always honored. Today is May 10th, 2023. And I've got an amazing guest today. We're going to meet someone, overcomers. And I tell you, we all have stories of that. And you're going to love this one today. But first, as you know, every week I want to get myself grounded and help you get grounded. And so what we do is do a 22-second breathing exercise, and we're going to breathe in for 7 seconds. We're going to breathe in calm. For 4 seconds, we'll hold, and then 11 seconds, we'll breathe out gratitude. So join me if you will, and you can do this anytime, day or night. It will help center you. It's a 22-second mini meditation, and so to speak. So here we go. Okay, let's breathe in, calm. Hold. Breathe out gratitude. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. So I think that we don't do enough of that. Be still and know. Sometimes we just keep going in this crazy, busy world. So that's helpful to me, and I hope it's helpful to you, just to take us a few seconds. The show is we're recording it live, and we have conversation at the end. If you hang around to the end, we're going to have conversation with the guest today, Joseph, and we can continue that, or if you have questions, you can put them in the chat. I'll read them at the end, to the end. Anyway, I'm grateful that you're here. I'm always, always so grateful. And today, our amazing, amazing guest, miracles are everywhere. Miracles are everywhere. And this guy is a witness as well. So Joseph Canfield is an author and a pastor and a healer. And in my estimation, he was abandoned, and he's redeemed. And he has used that redemption for a purpose of just serving God with skin on. People, people need people, and God needs people with skin on to make a difference. And Joseph is certainly one of those. So, he was born totally premature and cerebral palsy, and abandoned. His future adopted parents didn't want him. He was just about ready to be awarded the state when I believe the attending nurse ended up taking you home, is what I understand. So right. I'm going to let you tell the story more than I do. You've been there, done that. So you, Joseph Canfield, you live in Fort Worth, and tell a little bit about, who you are and how we can get to know you.
I'll begin by saying thank you for the opportunity to meet and share both with you and your viewing audience and any future respective viewers. And I've met you here last year through a common denominator that we share, and the story and the testimony that God has honored my life with. I just want to return back to him. I vowed to make my mother famous. When I I authored my book a couple of years ago with the mission and the purpose of just making my mother and Jesus famous as best I could. I fished around and bumped around with a variety of different titles, but we landed on the title that we have. Baby Boy Clapal was my given name on my birth card. I was never issued a birth certificate, nor was I issued a Social Security number when I was born, because the family that was supposed to take me had lined up to take me, left me at the hospital when I was born. I was born almost 2 months premature, which today is, it's still dangerous in 2023, but in 1968 in small town central Kansas, there were not a lot of options or resources to make sure you could sustain a baby that was challenged that way. But the little girl that gave birth to me was only 17. She was a senior in high school that had gone down to one of her colleges that she was looking to maybe attend as she graduated and moved into her college lifestyle. And she chose to go to a party and came home pregnant with me. And which is not uncommon.
Thank goodness, right? But
yeah,
God,
well,
right?
it was not good news on their family's side of the equation. Her mother was a bitter woman toward her own daughter, and my birth mother's mother is still alive. I still stay in touch with my grandmother. She's 101 this year, and just moved into her nursing home last year. She's lived on her own till last year this time.
Wow.
And but I didn't have any relationship with my birth mother at all. She is a broken woman and we just don't have a lot in common. I'm her only child. And, but as I was born sick, the respective family that was prepared to adopt me left me at the hospital. And the nurse that delivered me and was in the delivery room when I was born just had compassion and had a drive on the inside of her. She grew up Methodist, but kind of got a hold of the Jesus movement. Spirit of God moved in the late 60s and early 70s over our nation. And my mom was caught up in that wave of what God was doing back in 1968. And she just sensed in her heart that she was supposed to bring me home. And so she tried to go see a judge to adopt me. And go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, and you never were legally adopted, right?
I'm not legally adopted, no.
Yeah. But she's your mother.
She is.
Connections of the heart. Yeah.
Yeah. She was gracious enough to bring me home. She was almost 40 years old. She had 4 children, and she was divorced from Canfield, where I get my name. She was no longer married to him. And met with the birth family several weeks after I was born. And my mom sat me down when it was time to get a driver's license to say, hey, you've always been adopted. It's never been legal. You need to go to court to get you your name, and we need to go to court to get you a Social Security number. You won't have an adult future until you get those things. And so I had to go to court to do those things. But in the meantime, I grew up in this single mother home. A woman that my memories of her were an old leathered Bible and her devotional sitting outside every morning. She was faithful the whole of her life to spend time in the Word and to spend time with the Lord every morning. I grew up in a home where if I got sick, my first challenge or first response was to go to my mother and ask her to pray for me. And that's just the lifestyle that I grew up in. I remember going to see different ministers that she would take us to. As a kid, I fall asleep at a sticky movie theater floor to see a local Fort Worth minister that lives here, but we grew up in Kansas and we went to see him in Omaha, Nebraska. So I just grew up in this faith culture that donated an ability to have a sensitivity to the things of God, to have an awareness and a cognizance of the things of God. And I will never, ever regret the woman's desire to raise me in a home that was that way. She wasn't hyper religious. She wasn't flaky or weird. She just loved Jesus. And I tell people, look, I just wanted to love Jesus. I just try not to be weird about it.
And there's a common denominator about the people that I've been talking to that I just feel like this, we're overcomers here. We're overcomers. And the people that seem to have these amazing stories also have amazing faith. And I typically say on my show, this isn't about religion, God in a box, small God. No, this is about relationship and bold faith and living, a good, living good and living right and living righteous. And nobody, I mean, for your mom to have just brought home a kid that didn't even, she couldn't even adopt, there's something huge that was divinely appointed. And I might add divinely appointed because the way you and I met, we'll just add this here, because I think my very first show with guests was Gail and Michael Parker. And Michael, that was a couple weeks ago, about a month ago now, he had a less than 1% chance to live from Sunday night to Monday with a split aorta, stroke, all these things. And 6 years later, we just celebrated a dinner with them. So that story is powerful. So please go back and watch it if you haven't. Gail and Michael Parker, Miracle Michael, we call him. But you were on the phone with someone who was trying to connect you with Gail in that situation. And she was on the phone with someone who was trying to connect her, I believe, with you or something. I don't remember how that, you can say that, but y'all were both standing in the hospital lobby, unknowing of each other at that exact same moment in time. Now, how you just don't make that up, right? How divine is that?
7 million people in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex. There's every one of those 7 million people has 1,440 minutes in their day. The mathematical or statistical odds of she and I meeting and standing 50 feet apart on the day that the connection was being attempted to happen was just overwhelming. I told the story Friday night at our dinner that I had been my day off. I try to take days off and just kind of donate that to my wife and my family. But I'd gone down to the DMV to get a driver's license renewal, didn't have the right paperwork, stood there for 45 minutes, was mad. I went to the passport office. I stood there for 45 minutes to learn that I should have grabbed a number like you do at a deli when you come in, only to learn that it's too late to get a number. I won't get my services for my passport. So I was pretty frustrated. I'd already wasted a big chunk of my day off. And I was going down on behalf of one of my families in our church they asked me to go down and visit their grandmother who had fallen and broken her hip. And I had agreed to go. Sometimes you can get a day off and sometimes you can't as a pastor. And I just went down to meet this woman. And I went up to her room and she was as naked as the day she was born, standing there. And she just said, "Well, Pastor, I can't come now. They're taking me down to physical therapy. Can you come back and see me? Give me 45 minutes. And so now I'm really angry. So I'm downstairs in the lobby. I'm calling my wife to complain and just say, gosh, I've wasted half my day. I've got to sit here for an hour to wait for this woman. And that's when the phone rang and said, hey, a friend of mine is dying. Can you go pray for him? And I said, sure. Where is he? And she said, he's in Harris Downtown Hospital. And I said, well, I'm in Harris Downtown Hospital. I'm there right now. And she said, you're kidding me. Would you let my friend call you? And I said, sure. And so a few minutes later, my phone rang with Gail, your guest from about a month ago. And when my phone rang, I could see her across the lobby of the hospital talking on a phone. And we just realized that we were just 50 feet apart. And I told the story Friday night that she just was so calm as she was explaining. She looked exhausted and she was just calm. And then she told me the story, and she told me the story without tears and without, there was a grace on her. And so we went up to Michael's room and he was there. And I do my best, again, not to be weird or flaky, but I just do my best not to come in there and machine gun a prayer or vomit up and regurgitate Christianese speaking or anything like that. I always try to be thoughtful and mindful of what God would want me to do. And that requires a developed skill set of learning how to just stop and listen and kind of divorce yourself from the surrounding environment, what your eyes are measuring or what your ears are hearing, or what, because those things can dictate and have influence on your faith. And faith divorces itself from the see, taste, hear, smell, and touch world. Sometimes we have to divorce ourselves from what we can see, because when Jesus is telling Peter to get out and walk on the water, his eyes and his knowledge of water and gravity are telling him one thing. Faith has to suspend what your eyes can tell you, your ears can hear, your mind can know sometimes. And it can put you in a perilous situation, because sometimes you can look outside of the norm. And that's what I looked like. And because in my heart, I heard these words, I need you to lay on top of it. And so I literally climbed on the bed and climbed on to this man that I didn't know. I'm meeting him for the first time. I was surprised to see that he was conscious, but he was unaware. He couldn't speak. And I laid over him. And then I just began to let my heart pray. So I'm not regurgitating some Christianese speaking. I want to just pray what God needed me to pray in that moment. And when I got off of him, I looked Gail, his wife, as his brand new wife. They got married the night before.
In the hospital after the event. Yeah.
She's just sitting there, and it was just tears flowing out of her. And they weren't tears of fear. They weren't tears of stress. It might have been stress, but it was what I was measuring in that moment was this availability of the heart and the goodness and the power of God to the situation, inviting him to participate with this, because she knew what the doctor said. She knew what medicine said. And I sometimes reach the end of man, medicine, and machine. And I'm never opposed to man, medicine, and machine. I will never tell somebody not to take their medicine or not obey a doctor. I think that's where sometimes, I know you refer to me as a faith healer, and I'm really just a vessel. Jesus is the healer. I'm just available for him. But there was just a meekness to her and a humility to her. And the scripture reminds us in 1 Peter that God gives grace to the humble. And he's not trying to exclude himself from our daily situations, regardless of how minute or small we think the situation might be. I don't want to waste God's time with that prayer or petition. Well, that's ultimately how you practice. You gain faith muscles by constantly, I tell my church that you feed your faith with the right diet, the right environment, and the right exercise. And just like your muscles, if you give them the right diet, the right environment, and the right exercise, your muscles will grow. My little granddaughter is 5 years old. She has the exact same amount of muscles in her body that I do, but she can't lift what I can lift. She can't do what I can do. Why? Because she hasn't had the right diet, the right environment, and the right exercise yet to mature those muscles. And sometimes we get lost on the misconception that faith doesn't grow. And it does grow. In fact, 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 2, he wrote, to desire God's word like it's milk so that you can grow. 1 Corinthians chapter 3, Paul reminded the Corinth church that, hey, you meat, I've got to feed you milk because you're not grown yet. You're not ready for the meat of the word. You have to mature into it. And so when you're praying and asking God about silly little things, I mean, ridiculous things like parking lots at the mall,
Green lights. And by the way, you said in the beginning, people think they're going to waste God's time by talking to him. He loves it. Yeah.
He loves to be participatory in our lives. The scripture says that he cares about every detail of our lives. If this is the God that has chosen to numerically know the number of hairs on my head, then he cares about the details of my life. And I try to introduce that again to, I like atheists. I love agnostics. I love the unbelieving world, because I've decided I want the rest of my life to be a lifestyle that causes the doubters to doubt their doubt. I want them to embrace their doubt. But if they embrace their doubt, I want them to be able to say, well, I don't want to believe in God, or I don't think I can believe in God. But there's this Joseph Canfield that just wrecks my whole lack of theology, or my concept of who God is, because the things that God has allowed me to participate in and to serve him in, and for him to demonstrate himself to me, there's just too many count, and there's too many to say there was another explanation that could have done something like this other than the hand and the heart and the goodness of God. And that was the case with Michael, not only that day, and what I said Friday night at our dinner, and I believe it, that in 1968, when I was being abandoned at that hospital, God measured Michael Parker. He already knew that whatever he was installing and instilling in me, my calling, my destiny, my purpose, my mission, that one day would intersect with Michael's, and that he measured that need in that moment. And I happened to be the one that he used to meet that need and fill that gap in that moment. And I try to live my life like that every single day. That I don't think you meet anyone on accident, that if there's a purpose and a mission for the connection or the intersection, then I want to honor God. I want to honor my mother and all that she invested in my life, to reflect that and say, okay, Lord, is there a reason you needed me to meet this person today or to come across their lives? And in that case, that day, we got to see the goodness of God demonstrated. And Michael Parker went home just a few days after that. And
it was a miracle.
2 weeks later,
yeah. And while I was there, I think just before that, it was sometime during the night. So it was probably just late. I watched them do an ultrasound on his heart. I was the only one in the room. And I said, if God can create it, he can heal it. Absolutely. And I never let that. I mean, I was telling Gail, do only speak what you want. Don't speak what you don't want. Speak life, not death. And so we had already gotten there, and then you show up with all this amazing stuff. And one of the things you talk about, I have all kinds of little quotes that I have, but one of them is like unconditional love, unconditional forgiveness, not unconditional boundaries, right? So and the harder people are to love, the more they need it. And so our job, as Jesus said, and you can do what I did and even more. And if that's the truth, we can do a lot. We can do anything, all things. And so when you can do that, when you step into that and do all things that Jesus did and even more, then we should be walking in that authority and letting our light shine. We don't have to say a word to let that light and energy love people.
Well, people are hungry for it. I think every human being has an appetite. I tell people there's never been a culture of atheists. Doesn't matter if you find a tribe in a jungle in the middle of the Brazilian jungle or the African jungle, there's always awareness of the supernatural. They might worship a false god, something with a witch doctor or something like that. But at the end of the day, every tribe, every culture, every part of the human existence has a history someplace in the awareness and the acknowledgement of the supernatural. And Jesus came to occupy flesh and to demonstrate the heart and the hand of God. And John chapter 14, Philip was interviewing Jesus. And he said, hey, show us the Father, because Jesus was referring to God. And he said, well, Philip, I've been with you for 3 years. How can you say, show me the Father? If you've seen me, you've seen the Father. And he said that he only speaks what he hears and he only does what he sees. So I've said for years that Jesus never put sickness on somebody and said, hey, God's trying to teach you something. He only took disease away. He only took sickness away. So that we know God's opinion of disease because Jesus exercised or demonstrated that opinion during his time on the earth. And everywhere he went was to be a peace bringer. And he brought peace to people's bodies by eradicating disease or eradicating demonic influence. And as a result, peace was the product, or wholeness was the product. So we know God has an opinion of it, and he demonstrates that opinion. And so that's going to lead people down the question of, well, why is there disease or why is there brokenness? And the reality is it goes back to the very origins of creation, when authority and dominion were given over to Adam and Eve, and they traded it because they were deceived. And when they did, everything was lost, all the authority, all the dominion, and now they were aware that they were naked and they were vulnerable and they were exposed. But that changed the trajectory of the human race. So with every one of us was born into sin. We're born into brokenness. And that's why Jesus said you have to be born again, because our inner man, our spirit, Paul called him the inner man. Peter called him the hidden man of the heart. Proverbs chapter 20, the spirit of man is the candle of the Lord. Illuminates almost always from his spirit to our spirit, and that's how he brings light to us. But that spirit, again, needs the right diet, the right environment, and the right exercise, and it will grow. And if it does, you'll end up looking like, functioning like, thinking like, loving like, and forgiving like the hand and the heart of God, because he's the one that lives on the inside of you, and you end up reflecting him back to the world. So all that to say that everyone has an appetite for this. And like you said, most people ask for love in very unlovely ways. And a lot of times believers are not very good at greeting that moment and giving that person what they need. I got greeted a couple of days ago at a store, and I went into an AutoZone, and the man seemed like he was having a pretty rough day. The guy checking me out, and he just was pretty gruff. He didn't have a lot of kindness coming out of him, and he certainly was short with me. So in that moment, you get a chance to say, okay, can I echo back to him how he's treating me? Or do I disrupt that pattern and be part of his peace today? And so I just simply asked him, I said, looks like you're kind of having a rough day. And he softened a bit. I said, well, hey, what can I do to make you smile today? I don't know. You're right. I'm just having a moment. And he just asked me about the product I was buying. He says, is this good stuff? I said, it is. It's really good for your fuel systems. And he said, I see it a lot. And so I just softened him. I could have greeted him with some attitude he was greeting with. And that is a byproduct of maturation. That's a byproduct of spiritual growth. At the end of the day,
instead of getting offended and upset. So often we get offended and upset instead of hurt people, right? So instead of giving them grace, is that hurt 5-year-old that never got over it, or whatever it is.
Yeah. So you end up loving and looking like Jesus, and you do it in an organic way, as opposed to a synthetic or mechanical way.
Because that doesn't work, and it never really did. But we tried it, and I don't feel like it worked very well.
I tell people, if you'll just feed your spirit, you'll grow out of most of your shortcomings. You'll grow out of your sin. Every one of us used to play with toys, and really probably not many of us remember when we laid those toys down. We eventually just grew out of them. We quit participating with them. And your shortcomings, your sin, your mistakes, your habits, your brokenness, if you continue to be faithful to the diet of the Word of God and exposure to the people of God and believers, eventually you'll find yourself growing out of the things that have kept you bound, maybe to the totality of your life.
Yeah, we mature. It's called maturity. And spiritual maturity too. I mean, when we can just relax, so often we think there's so many rules. I talked to somebody today. I was like, every religion and every light worker and all these people are judging everybody else because ours is the way. And if we can just love unconditionally, without strings, without judgment, that is the way. I mean, that is just loving people and like I said before, the harder they are to love, the more they need it, so, but just walking through and letting go that everybody else is wrong, and that it's my way is the only way, and that I've got the corner on the market of the truth. I think if we could just start letting go of that spirit of offense, when we think about that healing of less than 1% chance to live, with Michael, going back to that, when the doctors on Monday were like, you're still here. Oh my gosh. And we didn't find that less than 1% out till after a surgery a few weeks later. But when you and I, that's how we met. And we both were in that mindset of healing, I think you asked Michael too. Didn't you ask him when he was awake that he want to live?
It's always the first question I ask. And when I'm in situations like that, because I need to know where someone's will is. and I need to know where their choices are, because some people, it's an arduous fight sometimes, and some people either don't have the strength, physical, the emotional fortitude, or the psychological fortitude to embrace and endure a fight, and sometimes it's just easier for them to go to heaven. And so, and a lot of people I've seen, and I've been in ministry for 39 years, and I've seen both sides of the equation. I've seen people that are ready to stay and ready to fight.
So sometimes when you speak the truth, you get attacked, right?
So. One of my stories that I tell is in my book, because I wrote my book in third person. So you're going to read it like a story. And these are people, to you, they're like a character, but to me, they were real people. But one of the stories I highlight is in 2009, my colon exploded on March 29th, 2009. And I was in March 28th, 2009, I was in a movie theater with my children at about 4:30 in the afternoon on a Friday night or Friday evening. And I felt it explode. And I leaned over to my wife. I said, something just happened and it's not good. And I went down to the lobby of the theater just to embrace and to pray and talk to the Lord. Say, what do I need to do? Because I don't feel right. Something just happened. And by the end of the movie, I was very sick. I was, it was like flu-like symptoms were overwhelming, very powerful. The Jayhawks were playing that night. You maybe can see my Jayhawk banner behind me here. I'm a big Jayhawk fan. And they were playing that evening, and I didn't want to miss the game. So I was watching that game with a heating pad down my shirt, just trying to stay warm, not knowing how sick I was. And it wasn't till the next morning. My wife was a board member on the PTA, and she had gone to a board meeting, and I called her and interrupted the meeting. I said, you need to come home. It's bad. And by this time I was starting to lose consciousness. We went to just a clinic first, like one of these little urgent care clinics. And that doctor, he ushered me right in. I got past everybody in the waiting room. And he took 5 minutes to examine me, and he just told my wife, he said, I'm not sure what's happening, but he's dying. He needs to get out of here. He said, it's bad enough. You need to take him. You'll be faster than an ambulance. And so by that time I couldn't even walk. She had to get me out. She got me to an ER that I'd been down to the week before in another part of town here in the Metroplex, another town. And by the time she got me there, she had to drag me in. I couldn't walk. And I knew to stay in my body, I just focused on one tile in the hospital ceiling. And a nurse came out and said, hey, you don't look too good. And I said, I don't feel too good. And they took me back. And of course, my symptoms were off the chart. My blood pressure is through the roof. My heart rate's 180 beats a minute, and it was bad. And my white blood count was through the roof when the labs came back, and they said, well, there's something going on. And it wasn't until about 10 o'clock that night that they finally figured out I had a gash in my colon. It was about 4 inches long. And I'd been just pouring poison into myself for, at that point, 30 hours. And the surgeon came in, emergency surgery. And once they saw that it changed everything. It went from, hey, he might have the flu, to, oh my gosh, he's dying. And the surgeon came in at 10:30 at night with an attorney. And she said, Mr. Canfield, I'm the doctor, and I'm getting ready to go scrub for surgery. You're very sick. Frankly, I don't know how you're alive. And this is the hospital attorney. You need to sign your will. You need to sign your power of attorney. And you need to absolve me of your death, because I do not believe you're going to survive what I'm getting ready to put you through. And I did like Michael. Michael told that story. He said he just apologized. I kept apologizing to my wife. I just said, I'm so sorry we're here. And this wasn't necessarily preventable. It wasn't something we could calculate or ready ourselves for, but we had a handful of people from our church and my worship leader and a few other people. And I called my mom, and my mom's just not, she went to heaven last year, but she was never afraid of anything. But she was a retired nurse, and so she knew how bad the diagnosis and prognosis was. And I said, Mom, this is the scenario. I'm going in 5 minutes. And she said, I'll call you back. I said, Mom, I'm going in right now. This might be the last time we talk. She said, I'll call you back. And she hung up. And I prayed with my team and apologized to my wife, kissed her one more time. And I told the Lord, I'm not ready to leave yet. I feel like there's more work for me to be done. I want to raise my children and I want to stay. And I'm trusting that you demonstrate your love to me today. And I could feel the twilight medicine hitting my IV, and my eyes started to get heavy, and my bed started to wheel down the hall, and my cell phone rang, and it was my mother, and my wife ran down and chased the bed, and she put the phone to my ear to hear my mother shout into the phone, "This is the word of the Lord." And then I never heard anything else because the medicine hit me. And I woke up the next morning. I wore a colostomy bag for about half of 2009. I lost 8 inches of my colon that night. Surgeon came in around 8 o'clock the next morning, 9 o'clock, and she said, "Mr. Canfield, I can't explain how you're alive. The only thing I can tell you is that you were healthy enough when this happened. You survived it, and you're a man of faith." But she said, medically, I can't explain why you're alive. You should have been. This kills people in 2 hours, especially a gash this big. And had to wear a bag. And we had our team over every Tuesday night for dinner, and got the bag taken off at the end of the summer. And about 9 days after that second surgery, my team was over on a Tuesday night, and I bled through like 6 or 7 shirts. And I called the surgeon. I said, "I think there's something wrong." I felt really similar to the day it ruptured, and I was getting cold and chills. And she said, "If you can make it through the night, come see me in the morning, first thing, 8 o'clock. And if you can't, you need to get to ER." And we didn't have health insurance at the time, so most of our decisions were going through the filter of how much is this going to cost. So I learned if I just laid flat, I wouldn't bleed out. And we went the next morning, and she came in, she opened up my shirt. She said, "It's not good." And she left. This is just in her office. She came back in. She had an assistant. They began to don their gloves, their masks, their gowns. She grabbed a scalpel, and she said, "I need you to turn your head and grip the table." And with no anesthetic, no preparation other than turn your head and grip the table, that woman laid me open right there in her office. And I could hear everything splatting on the ground, and my wife's eyes were as big as saucers. And I was like, "Holy cow, what is happening?" And I could feel her tearing and tugging and ripping me open. And she washes me out. And she looks at my wife and she says, "Come here, Mama." And she taught my wife how to field dress that wound and how to pack it. And she said, "We can't close him back up. It'll have to close naturally. And you'll have to change this twice a day." And my wife is the best woman I've ever known in my life. I'm humbled to have her as my best friend. But that woman changed that wound faithfully for the next several months while it was 7 inches wide, 4 inches deep. We got home that night. She pulls the gauze out and she says, "I can see your intestines." And she says, "I have a high school education. I don't feel qualified to do this."
She has the love of a mother and a love of a wife and the love of God right there. And so she is capable, and we all
that kind of thing.
Can do it. Yeah. Wow.
But those
That's
are
another story. I mean, so the overcoming stories, I'm pretty sure, first of all, you were abandoned at birth. You had cerebral palsy diagnosed at birth, and you've had that death experience, basically. I mean, that's very similar to Michael's story where, just all of a sudden something happened.
This is a woman that prayed me. In around Christmas time, 1980, going into 81, I developed a big knot on my right leg, and our family doctor said it doesn't look good, and diagnosed me with a bone tumor, bone cancer, and transferred me to the hospital downtown Kansas City. I spent 9 days in the small hospital, and then got out on a Saturday morning, spent the night at my house that night. My mom took me to a church south of Kansas City on the Missouri side the next day, where they laid hands on me and prayed for me and believed for me. And I got admitted into that hospital, and that hospital was going to determine if I had any tumors or cancer anywhere else in my body, But then they went into how much of this leg can we save? And they were going to make an attempt to they were trying to adjust my leg severance based on the prosthetic. They were trying to give me the best prosthetic. And it was the day Ronald Reagan was shot in March of 1981 that I was in an x-ray room, a radiology waiting room.
Well, you were a teenager, or you were 12?
I was 12.
Yeah, oh my gosh, what a horrific for anybody.
But my mom, like you were talking Friday night at Michael's dinner, my mom had just developed this standard of expectation of God meeting her boy. And she literally did not permit unbelief in my hospital room.
Exactly, with Michael. Exactly.
She set up my sister-in-law was there, and I literally had brothers come visit me, but they weren't ready to believe God. So my mom wouldn't even permit him in the room. And it wasn't flaky or weird. It was just bulldog tenacity that she just said,
bold faith.
I've got a standard of belief. If you cannot equate yourself to my standard of belief, then I'm glad you came to visit us, but you're not going to be welcome in the room. And the day Reagan was shot, it was the day before the surgery, March 30th, 1981, when that surgeon, he was a man from Great Britain. He wasn't American, but my mom was going down to the cafeteria that evening, and the doctor was in the elevator, and he had my x-rays and my CAT scans. And he just began to weep with my mother. And he was trembling and shaking. And he just said, I've something terrible. I've made a huge mistake. I need to get him back down for more pictures. We have to take him back down tonight. And he held the pictures up in the light of the elevator. And he showed my mom. He said, the tumor is gone. The cancer is gone. And something's wrong. I can't medically explain what happened here. And they dismissed me 4 days later with the diagnosis of spontaneous remission. That's what they wrote on the paperwork.
Miracles is all we need to say.
Well, I tell my church that, and this is important for your viewing audience, that a lot of people begin to search and dig and hunt and hope for a miracle. And a lot of times what we need to search and hope for is just the presence of God. I tell my church that there are no miracles in the presence of God. There's only his normal. And when we come into his presence, we may bring abnormal into his presence, but because of his presence and who he is and his potency and his power and his love that he has for us to see us whole, then our abnormal lines up with his normal. We call it a miracle, but Jesus never did. Jesus never freaked out and said, oh, look at this. Look what I did. I raised this girl from the dead, or I cured this leprosy, or I healed this blind eye or deaf ear, or I cast out this devil. He was never shocked or stunned. All he was doing was introducing the presence of God and his normal to the abnormal of the human race. And he
just said, thank you. See, this is where he wasn't begging, please help me, God, please help me heal this person. No, he said, thank you, get up and walk. There was no wimpiness in there. He took the authority. Deuteronomy 7:15 and many other places say, you shall be free of every disease.
Yeah.
Most of us weren't really taught that. I wasn't taught that growing up,
my mom wasn't either.
Yeah. So the fundamental upbringing did not prepare me for the incredible bold faith that I somehow, bold faith, no fear, bold faith, no fear. It is who I am. Bold faith, no fear. And and when we can stand in that, speak the words. Every word matters, and speak the words that are important. That speak what you want, speak life, not what you don't want. So this is a message that I'm constantly talking about. Then my little which book is it? This side. My little book, Outrageously Courageous, Bold Faith, No Fear, Step Towards the Gun. When you can do that without fear, because who you say you are is bold faith, no fear.
Well, remember what the scripture reminds us. It's in 1 John chapter 4, toward the end of your Bible. where this is the only disciple that lived into the winter of life. Every other disciple was a martyr. John was the only one that lived old, and he wrote this book when he was old. And he was young when he first started following Jesus. He was probably around 16 or 17 years old when he joined as a disciple. But he wrote this to the churches of the day, and he said, look, perfect love, it casts out fear, it drives out fear. And a lot of people, I think, a lot of people know how to ask, they even know how to believe, but they get handicapped in the receiving part. And actually being able to function, think, believe like you've received it, even before your eyes are able to measure it.
As if it is. And then lay it at his feet. So releasing it, believe, ask, believe, receive, act as if it's already on its way, and let it go. I don't think we need to beg. I think that we've been taught to please help me. But I think thank you that we're helped. Thank you that it's already on its way. And I believe that was not in my raising as well.
It wasn't. My second year at college, and I won't go into the details of how God got me to the private college I went to, but he got me there in a very spectacular and supernatural way. I try not to use the word incredible in my vocabulary ever, because it really means this, not credible. And God is. He's very credible. So I subtracted.
Good name. Good word.
Several years ago. But I was sick. I got glasses my first year at college. I'd never had glasses. And then the second year, as school started back up, I began to read quite a bit, and I was getting headaches, and went to see an eye doctor at the mall. And he just said, hey, I think you probably ought to see an ophthalmologist. There's something going on. And I said, okay. And I went to see the ophthalmologist, and he just kind of rolled away from me after he looked behind my eyes with the light. And he just said, you need to go see a neurosurgeon. I won't be treating you. And the campus opened an athletic facility that following Friday night. And I fell over. I collapsed on the campus. It was an all-night deal for the new athletic facility. And I woke up with a bunch of people surrounding me. I didn't know what had happened. And I just fell over. And someone said, hey, you probably ought to go talk to one of the campus pastors. Went to a private Christian college. And so I went, told him what I was contending with. I said, my eyes are getting bad. Sunlight's very painful. I get very nauseous. I've not thrown up. I don't throw up at all. I hate throwing up. I think I've thrown up 4 times since 1976. And 3 of those were food poisoning. I just don't throw up. But he said, well, let's go see my family doctor. And I saw the family doctor, because the wait to see a neurosurgeon was like 4 weeks out. And that guy got me to see a neurosurgeon the following Monday. And by that time, I'd harvested x-rays and CAT scans. And we went from the waiting room. We didn't go into the exam room. We went back to his office. And I knew when we went back there, something wasn't right. And he asked me to explain my symptoms. I did. And he said, well, I've got good news and bad news. I said, all right. And I'm 19 at this point. And he says, the bad news is, Mr. Canfield, you've got a brain tumor. The good news is that it's right at the top of your sinus cavity. And I don't think I'll have to violate the integrity of your skull to get it. I think I can go straight up your sinus, and I think we can get it. And he said, but I need to check the rest of, with your history, we just need to do some exams this week. So I was in as an outpatient every day. I'd go to school in the morning, the hospital in the afternoon, then I'd go to work in the evening for the next few days. He said, well, we're going to go get it next Thursday. A week from this Thursday, we're going to go get it. And of course, you adopt a lot of fear, and you adopt a lot of stress, and you adopt a lot of guessing and wondering.
Questions. I mean, what is this, right?
And
questions.
Lord, I'm right where I thought you wanted me to be. And at one point, I just broke down and said, okay, if I'm going to be sick, I want to be sick with my family. I don't want to be sick by myself, because I was in Oklahoma and I'm from Kansas City. And the Spirit of God spoke to me. And I want to make sure I'm not sounding weird, but inside my spirit, I heard this conversation. He said, son, what does my word say in Mark 11:23-24? And that scripture says this, that whoever says to this mountain, be removed and be cast into the sea, and doesn't doubt the things in his heart that he says, he'll have what he says. Therefore, I say to you, whatever things you desire when you pray, believe that you receive them and you will have them. And I quoted that back. And inside this conversation, this internal conversation, I hear this word again. Well, what does verse 22 say? I thought about it a minute. It says, well, it says, have faith in God. Now speak to your mountain. And he said, son, that's my faith that you're using, not yours. And that's literally what the Greek language says. It says, be possessed with God's faith. Therefore, speak to this mountain, tell it to go throw itself into the sea. And then the Lord just taught me something. He said, son, you've been doing 23 and 24 all week long. You've been asking, you've been believing. But he said, the beginning part is, you know that that's my faith, not yours. I've given you victory over this. Now speak to that thing inside your head and tell it to go. And so I did. Again, this is a Thursday at 11:30 in the morning, 3 days after the diagnosis. I went Friday for an MRI. I went on Monday for the results of those MRI. And the doctor brought me back to his same office. Mr. Canfield joined me in my office. So I went back. He says, how do you feel? Because on Thursday, when I got to work that afternoon, I felt like I was going to get sick. And I fell over and I grabbed my head. And when I did, it manifested out of my nose. I didn't sneeze. I didn't cough. It just felt like this amazing amount of pressure building, and it burst out of my nose and into my hand. And it was snot and mucus, but inside the pool of junk in my right palm were two separate little chunks. And I went and washed up. I called my pastor, said, God just did something, and holy cow. And I went on MRI for that. And the next day I did the MRI. And then on Monday I went back, and I'm sitting in the same chair that he 7 days earlier said, you've got a tumor. He says, how do you feel? I said, well, I feel really good. I haven't had a headache since 4:30 on Thursday. And I told him the story. He said, follow me. And we go out and we look on the X-ray light board. And he's got my X-rays, my CAT scans, and my MRIs. And he shows everything on the X-ray. Here's your tumor. Here's the mass. Here's a layer of water around your brain. He said the brain will fill with fluid when there's an invader. And it's a body's reaction. It's just going to stop movement. So it's going to fill with fluid. And that's what's here. And he said, but none of this is on any of these. And my MRI was probably 40 different photos. He said, none of this is here. And I explained to him again what happened. And that man would not give me a clean bill of health for a year. I had to go back and see him once a month, get lab work done and drawn. And he had to admit, spontaneous remission. There's absolutely nothing I can do other than, and I felt great. I felt it come out of my.
That's amazing. And we don't have a couple of minutes left. So what I noticed here is, miracles are nothing to God. I mean, that's just his normal. Mm-hmm. And when we open ourselves to ask, believe, receive, and act as if it's done, and then release it, it takes the pressure off of us for him to just do what he needs to do. And I love that. It sounds to me like you have, I said in the beginning, abandoned, redeemed, but I believe you're near, abandoned and died and are near death and have miracle stories throughout your life. I mean, age 12, what a scary thing that was. And to move on and still be here ministering, and really what I believe was a conduit in Michael's healing as well as many other components there. It's people need hope. And that's what I'm trying to get across here. There is hope. There is hope. There is ways. And if we would maybe turn off that media machine, the propaganda that tries to keep us in fear, and step out of that a little bit and just be still and know and listen, because we've got every bit of the God's wisdom is in us. Every breath we take is the I am coming into us. So don't, I guess part of my message typically is just speak what you want, not what you don't want. There is hope, even when it's hopeless. These less than 1% people, and I know many of them, several of them anyway, that have come back. And obviously you're one of them.
Well, I included I included Michael's story in my book, and I included a handful of others that God has allowed me to steward during this season, because I'll conclude with this, saying that the purpose of my story is that a man gave me a DNA test for my 49th birthday, and it led me down a path to be able to meet my father, which we were not attempting to do. We weren't trying. It happened in a very organic way. But I got to meet the man that my birth mother met at that college, and he had never had children, and it turned into 5 years of a fantastic relationship. He left the earth last year, 2 weeks before my mother. I buried both my mother and my father on Memorial Weekend, 2 hours apart in the great state of Kansas last year. But if your viewers are looking for hope, if you're looking for a story that again causes the doubters to doubt their doubt, if you've got doubt and you want to starve that doubt, then dive into the Word of God as always. But if you wanted something on a practical, relatable level, I think my book would be a benefit to anybody that's looking for hope, looking for what we would term the miraculous. But ultimately, it's all a manifestation, the demonstration of how God loves. And when you are developed in how much God loves you, the casualty of how much God loving you is fear. Fear dies. It meets its end if you can live in how you're loved. And from there, you can position yourself to be a person who receives from Him, talks with Him based on the arena or culture of His love for you.
I've got about 15 seconds before I have to end this. This is amazing. Find Baby Boy Clapple, A Journey to Fatherhood, Finding Fatherhood on Amazon. And I'm so grateful for you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And I got to say bye-bye for now till next week.
Okay. Bless you. Thank you for having me on.
Parting is such sweet sorrow. The Charla Anderson Show, encouraging you to stand strong and courageous with bold faith, no fear, immense hope, kindness, and love, especially towards yourself. Visit charlaanderson.com for replays, blogs, and more on her ever-expanding website, as well as watch her live TV show on winwinwomen.tv, Roku, Apple TV, and Amazon Fire. And so that we can continue learning together and growing this community of beautiful souls, we invite you to share the Charla Anderson Show with your circle of friends. Until we meet again next week, remember always, choose joy.